there, Patriots. This is Miss Kerr bringing you Micro 4, Pathogens and Your Health, and this is on page 7 of your microbiology packet. Today we're going to talk about all the different pathogens, some of which you've already learned about separately, and you're going to understand how to prevent some of these diseases, and then how to also treat viral and bacterial diseases. All right, so this is some information that's going to help us fill out page 7 today. You're not filling out any blanks as I talk about this. So just listen, and I'm going to explain some of the pictures here and what they show. So infectious diseases are caused by the presence of a pathogen in the body. Infectious diseases spread through contact with an infected person. So if you come in contact with somebody that is infected with a pathogen, you could then have that pathogen passed on to you. If you share a contaminated object, so for instance, maybe you share some water with someone, maybe you share utensils, maybe the water you're drinking is contaminated. Some viruses can travel through contaminated objects, for instance, doorknobs. If somebody is sick and does not wash their hands regularly, that could be a contaminated object. Animals can become infected. We've already talked about parasites. So for instance, the tick and the mosquito can pass on different pathogens. You've heard of rabies probably. Rabies can be passed through raccoons, sometimes infected dogs. And then environmental sources are, just things in the environment. For instance, this glass of contaminated water might also count, as an environmental source of an infectious disease. And so when we say infectious disease, this is something that is passing from one person to another by any of these means. So you have a chart at the top there, and so this is how infectious diseases are spread. The first one is through infected people. So we have two types. We have direct contact and indirect contact. So maybe you shake the hands of somebody that has a pathogen, is sick, and then you acquire that sickness. Indirect contact would be sneezing. So someone sneezes or coughs into the air. Those particles are in the air, and then you are breathing in those particles that are in the air now. Some diseases that spread this way, and there are lots of them, but here are some common ones. So cold sores, if you come into contact with someone that has a cold sore, those transfer from skin to skin very easily. Influenza or flu, that's going to travel this way from one infected person to the other by sneezing, coughing, direct contact possibly. And so that's why, especially for the flu, for instance, if you're at home, you have a fever, and it is the flu, they tell you to stay at home is the best thing to do, because you're going to infect other people if you go out where a lot of people are. All right, the next source would be a contaminated object. Lots of examples, but cups, eating utensils. A lot of people share cups and eating utensils, and it's really not a great idea, guys, because someone may have come in contact with, a common cold or the flu virus, And so that's kind of, maybe it's day one they've encountered these, right? So it's in their body. And then in the next couple days, they start showing symptoms. Well, you drank from the cup, you ate from the utensils that they ate from on that first day when they technically had the flu. And so they were contagious. And now, guess what? You're probably going to be contagious too. So just be careful, especially during flu season, with sharing utensils and cups with other people. All right, infected animals can spread disease, so typically through animal bites. Another name for these infected animals are called biological vectors. And so bio means life, so this is something that's living, that's carrying a disease. Rabies is something that is carried, again, by possibly raccoons or dogs. And if you get bitten by a raccoon or a dog, you need to get treated right away because rabies can, have drastic symptoms. Lyme disease is carried by ticks. So if you are going hiking or you're going to be in some tall grass, it would be best to wear long pants, hiking boots, so, tall socks so that you don't get any ticks on your legs and get possibly, get bitten by those ticks and have them be carrying Lyme disease. All right, and then we said environmental sources, so those could be soil, food, water. Contact with the pathogen that lives naturally in the soil or water. All right, and some examples of that are salmonella. So foods that are undercooked may contain salmonella, Clostridium. The one video we'll watch talks about Clostridium botulinum. There are lots of strains of Clostridium. Clostridium botulinum is botulism, which could come from contaminated canned goods. So if you're ever shopping for canned goods like soup or beans or something that comes in a can, just make sure that the can's not super bent or open or anything like that. You want to get one that is, in pretty good shape. So there's lots of ways that we can, knowing this information, right, how it spreads, there's lots of ways we can prevent getting some diseases, and then also ways of treating them as well. So that's what we're going to talk about next. And this will help you answer the questions 1 through 5 right in the middle of your page on page 7. So how do we treat bacterial diseases? So bacterial infections were talked about in Micro 3 on page 6. And some of those include, Lyme disease, strep throat, food poisoning, and tetanus. All right, so if you, have any of the symptoms, let's take strep throat, for instance, right? That's a common one. And you go to the doctor, they're going to do a test, and they're going to see if it's a bacterial infection. And make sure that you have strep before treating you. Then they're going to give you an antibiotic, which is a medication, and medications are chemicals, and that chemical is going to kill the bacteria that's causing that strep throat without harming your good cells. So antibiotics are going to kill that bacterial infection. Okay, now if you have, for instance, a common cold or a sinus infection, okay, or just a plain old cough, Antibiotics aren't going to help you, okay? That is caused by a virus. So a common question is, why didn't the doctor give me an antibiotic when I went in? Well, probably because you didn't have a bacterial infection. You probably had a virus. And so the doctor did not prescribe you antibiotics because they're not going to help. All right, so moving on to viruses, how do we treat viruses? If we can't take an antibiotic, how do we treat them? Well, there are a lot of medications that treat the symptoms for viruses. Unfortunately, viruses really just have to run their course. And so, if you have a virus or common cold, you can take, over-the-counter things like Mucinex and Robitussin and things like that to help with, your cough, the mucus buildup, things like that. But you really just need rest, and sometimes warm fluids are going to help get that throat clear. But otherwise, just really rest and lots of fluids. Some viruses can be prevented. The word prevented means it comes before, right? So some viruses can be prevented with a vaccine. And you get a lot of vaccines when you're a baby or a toddler, so you probably don't even remember some of them. But you get a lot of them when you're a little kid. For instance, polio, you get an MMR shot, measles, mumps, rubella, and all of those are required before you go to school. There's also some vaccines that you might get, yearly. So influenza is one that you get every year. The flu vaccine changes every year. So there are different strains of the flu. And so every year we have to get a new flu vaccine. All right, chickenpox is a newer vaccine. It has come around in my lifetime. I never had the chickenpox vaccine. I actually had chickenpox when I was in kindergarten. But the the chickenpox vaccine prevents you from getting chickenpox, which could be life-threatening. Typically it's not, but in some cases it is. Hepatitis is something that they have. It's a set of 3, hepatitis B is a set of 3 vaccinations that you can get when you're a teenager in your 20s. And then we all probably know about AIDS from health class. AIDS does not have a vaccine. AIDS is something that if you have it, they do have a lot of antiviral medications to help the symptoms with AIDS now, but there is no cure for AIDS. All right, also in those questions, it asks about antibiotic resistance. So this is going to help you answer that question. And this is a little bit tricky to understand. It occurs when bacteria evolve or change, and when they're able to live in the presence of antibiotics that would normally have killed the bacteria. Okay, so let's give you an example. For instance, my daughter had a really bad strain of an ear infection. So she took an antibiotic, and then 9 days into the antibiotic, she ran another fever. So we went back to the doctor and found out that that bacteria was not getting killed by that original antibiotic. So they actually had to give her a stronger antibiotic to kill that. So what that shows is that that bacteria that she had in her ear was resistant to the antibiotic that was originally given to her. And this happens because antibiotics are overprescribed. So same reason I was saying before, why do you go to the doctor and sometimes they don't give you an antibiotic? Because it's not a bacterial infection. If doctors just give antibiotics out for any old thing, so common colds, coughs, things like that, they're going to end up being resistant to that bacteria. So resistant to that antibiotic, excuse me. So bacteria becomes resistant